There we go. So we all know. Well, welcome. Thanks for making the time and for being together. And we're going to look at some, we call them superstitions, call them rituals and traditions, I guess, depending on your outlook on them. Magical or mystical things that are done in our tradition. Some Ashkenazi customs, some Sephardic customs, and I want to hear from you all. Are there customs that might be Jewish, or that you just know that Jewish ancestors did, that maybe they sort of fall under this category of Jewish superstition or not, if it's just something that happened in your family or was sort of idiosyncratic. So I want to hear those too. And because, I certainly have a list of ones that I have found, some of which I had heard of before, some of which I had not, that I'm happy to share, as well as some of the origins behind them. But also I know that these are not exhaustive lists, and happy to go in different directions as well as our conversation takes us. So as I was thinking about this, our time together, certainly there are texts that came to mind, some of which seem to point to what we might call superstitious thinking or acting within Jewish tradition, within the Torah and rabbinic text. And then there are also texts that warn against certain types of magical practices for Jews. So I am thinking about in Deuteronomy 18, it talks about not going and doing the things that the nations do, meaning the non-Israelites. So it says that you shouldn't use divination, or use a soothsayer or an enchanter or a witch or a charmer, a medium, a wizard, a necromancer. All of those are abominations for God, right? So that seems pretty strong as far as, at least on the magic side of things, the things we shouldn't be doing. But then, of course, when you have an admonition such as this one, it kind of points to the idea that maybe these were widespread practices that the Israelites were doing, and that's why the Torah comes and warns against doing them. So I think there's sort of like the official party line, and then there's what your everyday Israelite did, which was probably some of this stuff. And in the book of in one of the books of Samuel, we actually see King Saul going to visit the witch of Endor to do some divination and to be able to speak to the prophet Samuel, who had died. So it's certainly out there, and it's certainly part of the tradition. There are rabbinic texts that essentially say that, not that these things don't exist, and not even that they're not useful or that they don't work, but just that they're not for the Jews, right? Because the Jews have God, so you don't need to be doing all this other stuff and tapping into what the other nations are doing. I'm thinking about in Tractate Shabbat from the Talmud. Rabbi Nachman ben Yitzchak says, one who is born under Mars will be a shedder of blood. And Rabbi Ashi says either a surgeon or a thief or a slaughterer or a moil, all of whom shed blood in one way or another. And Rabbah said, I was born under Mars. And Abaye said, you too inflict punishment and kill. So it seems like they are putting some weight onto astrology, right, in this conversation. And then Rabbi Hanina says the planetary influence, meaning the mazal, right? The mazal literally translates to constellation. And so he says the planetary influence gives wisdom, it gives wealth, and Israel stands under the planetary influence. He says, Yesh mazal Yisrael. There is mazal, right? These constellations affect the Jewish people. And then Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein mazal Yisrael. There is no planetary influence for Israelites, for the Jewish people. So even rabbinic circles, there was disagreement as to, at least as far as astrology goes, whether that affects Jews and whether, I guess, then Jews should put any weight into these things or not. So there are texts that deal with magical thinking, whether we're yet in the realm of superstition, not quite sure. And then we get a medieval commentator, Nachmanides, who says the study of astrology is not forbidden, right? There are rabbis who say it's forbidden. You should, the Jew who is faithful and pious should not busy themselves with these things. But then Nachmanides, who's a heavyweight, but was also known to be a Kabbalist, so might have been influenced from that mystical side of things, says it's not forbidden. Says that the Talmud says there's no mazal, there's no celestial influence for Israel. But he also says there were sages who didn't share that view. And thus, even though the latter was a minority opinion, the fact that it exists demonstrates that astrology is not nonsense, nor is involvement in its study forbidden. So Nachmanides says, go right ahead. He's basing his beliefs on a minority Talmudic opinion that I just read for you, but he's saying it's not actually forbidden, and that's something that we can put some weight behind and that we can feel affects our lives. So knowing that it's not forbidden and that also widespread in the Jewish community, that I'm sure that we have encountered things that we do, that our parents have done, that our ancestors of various sorts have told us about, or that we've seen them do and we might not know the reason for, or maybe they did tell us the reason for, but it's widespread. And so I think it's worth studying and it's worth knowing about, and ones that we do know about, diving a little bit more into and seeing like where does this actually come from? What is this doing? What is it trying to protect us against, or who? And how did this come to be? So I don't have all of the answers to all of those, but certainly to some, I think we can point back and see how they evolved. But I would love to know from you all, are there what we might call superstitions that you have experienced, that maybe you even practice, and would be willing to talk about, or that you know of from your own family experiences? Yeah, Barbara.
I don't know where it came from or if it's true, but I have an uncle who came from Cuba, and I saw a picture of him. He had long golden curly hair, was dressed in a gorgeous dress, and I was told that they dressed him this way until he was 3, when he got his first haircut, so that Lilith wouldn't come and steal him.
So I mean, dressing him more like
right, making him look like a girl until his first haircut, to protect him from Lilith. To take the boys and not the girls.
Right, and then at 3 years old, you traditionally have a hair cutting ritual, the upshurin,
right,
which also relates to the biblical idea of not harvesting the fruit from a tree until it's 3 years old. So that's sort of being the age where you can harvest things or take things off, trim it, right, and also dedicate it for certain purposes. So demons such as Lilith are widespread when we start to look into these superstitions as to why they exist, and a lot of the reason behind them are to protect against the demons, right, or to You might also know the evil eye, right, which is sort of amorphous and what is it? But many of these superstitions and these rituals that we have are to protect against one of those two things, right? Either the evil eye or a demon, named or unnamed. That's an interesting one. Michael?
Two. One was my father wore garlic around his neck. I'm not quite sure how old, 16, 17, 18 years of age, to keep the evil eye away, to keep him healthy. I'm not sure if exactly when he stopped, but all of his childhood. And I never saw them do, but my mom said, and I can't remember which grandmother it was, would do something like this for the evil eye, keep the evil eye away. Like, I don't know, tapping your fingers or something like that.
Okay.
But I actually have a larger question, which is, where does superstition and religion meet, overlap, separate?
Right. And that's not totally clear because we have rituals, right? We have, rituals that maybe we've reinterpreted over the years, but the origins could have been to get rid of the demons. So, one example that I've heard is that one way to ward off demons is by braiding things. So you see a lot of Hasidic girls have braided hair in the Haredi community. And we have braided bread on Shabbat, right, in the form of challah. So I've been told that one of the reasons for that is to keep the demons away. Now, a braided challah loaf is pretty core to our religious practice. We only make it round around the high holy days. But I don't know how much most of us think about why it's braided, other than that's just what it is. But I think that is the origin of the braid in the challah. Another one that you might know well is at a Jewish wedding, right? We stomp on a glass at the end of the wedding. There are lots of interpretations of that, right? One is that even in our most joyous moments, we remember the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem. When I do a wedding, I tend to talk about how more generally there's brokenness in the world, and we remember that even in happy moments, so that the happiness that we're feeling now might inspire us to bring repair after the wedding or is over. But the origin of it is probably to make a big loud noise to scare off any demons that might get in the way of this couple's happiness. So is that religion? Is that superstition? Is it both? Right? I don't think that they're mutually I think there's a Venn diagram, and one of the things we might want to do as we go through this is where might we place something in the Venn diagram? One of the distinctions that one of my professors made in rabbinical school was that when we study religion, there's the folk aspects, and then there's the elite aspects. Now we might look at the Talmud, right, and legal texts and say that's what the elite say we should do or we should think about, right? They are the ones with the institutional power and the published works and recognizable names. And then there's what we say amcha, right? Just the people, what the people did, right? That's the more the folk religion. And so a lot of this superstition, as I might call it, is probably came out of that folk practice, not divorced from their understanding of religion. And so, yeah, I don't know where we draw that line or if we even need to. Nate, or sorry, Nat. I know your name.
That's okay. I don't know how to do the raise hand thing.
That's okay. I can see
it. Anyway, no, my two aunts, may they rest in peace, used to always do it, not spitting 3 times, but poo, poo, poo. And, nothing bad should happen to us. And my mother used to joke, you children were covered with spit, because they would always go, you should grow up healthy, poo, poo, poo. You should do well in school. Poo, poo, poo. You know.
Yeah. Right. And so that's
That's
a very common one that you still see people do regularly in certain circles. And right, it's again to protect against the evil eye somehow, right? That you're kind of spitting out maybe any negativity or any bad stuff, and so that only the good stuff will happen.
I have a
Anyone?
question.
Yeah.
It seems to me like I have a huge, probably the size of an actual hand Hamsa on the front of my house, and I've had it there for years. And it seems to me a mezuzah is almost like a superstition of protection too. What's the difference? Like I have a mezuzah on my home too, but the Hamsa is really superstition.
Right, and the Hamsa is one that actually comes from the Sephardic world or the Mizrahi world, right? Middle East, North Africa, and I think there's some overlap with Muslim practice as well with the Hamsa. Hamsa is Arabic for five, right? So that's the 5 fingers, whereas in Hebrew it would be Chamesh or Chamisha, and so the Hamsa again is to protect from the evil eye, and so people have them in their homes. People wear them as necklaces. I don't know if nowadays people would really call them amulets, but that might be something that we could identify them as if we're looking at it in a critical way or an outsider perspective. And so, right, it's that sign of protection. Some even would think about it as like the hand of God. Not that we depict God with any human form, but some form of protector whose hand is over us. And so with mezuzah, that's certainly a mitzvah, right? It's in there in the Torah. We say it traditionally twice a day when we do ve'ahavta, right? That you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. And within that mezuzah is the scroll with the Shema and ve'ahavta on it. So it's something we're commanded to do. So that's I'd say very firmly in the realm of religion, right? Of fulfilling mitzvot. But a lot of the ways that people think about mezuzah maybe go more towards superstition. So the shin that you see on a mezuzah, right, stands for Shaddai, which is a title for God, and also sometimes people see as an acronym for Shomer Delatot Yisrael, guardian of the doorways of Israel, or Jewish households. And when I was at a camp in Malibu one summer, there was, I think, someone in a cabin like broke their leg, or something bad happened in the cabin. I can't remember exactly what, if they got sick. And one of the Israelis who was on staff said, well, I went and looked and there wasn't a mezuzah on that cabin, or like the mezuzah wasn't kosher or something, and that's why the bad thing happened in that cabin, because their mezuzah was defective or it was missing. And so that's a fairly common belief about the power of the mezuzah, right? Its protective power, which is not right there in the Torah, right? The Torah just says do it, right, as a reminder of God and a reminder of the Torah. But people put that weight onto mezuzah, so that it's certainly a religious practice, but maybe there's some magical thinking behind it as well. So that's one that might go in the middle of that Venn diagram. So what I'd say is the difference between the two is the Hamsa is not something that's required, right? It's not commanded, whereas mezuzah is. And there's probably a broader spectrum of thought as to why we have a mezuzah and what it means to us, whereas it's probably narrower for the Hamsa. That's my analysis of it, I guess. Mom, I saw your hand.
I'm not sure if this is a superstition or if it was just a ritual, but growing up, we weren't allowed to walk around in socks if my grandparents were coming over because it meant that we were mourning the death of our parent. And I remember my grandmother in particular would get very upset if she caught us in socks. And I have the feeling that to her it was that we were going to bring that on in the family. So we could be barefoot or we could be in shoes, but those were the only choices.
That's not something you passed on to me. That's the first I've heard of it.
No,
I don't know that.
forgotten.
That's not one I've encountered before.
Yeah. Goes along, I think, with covering the mirror. If somebody's died,
Huh.
it was kind of along similar lines.
Yeah. And I want to make sure I see, there's one in the chat, Lewis, I think from you, that one that Turkish Jews avoid cutting their nails at night. Is that right?
That's correct. And the Muslims also do that, but I don't know whether it's a shamanic practice or not. It may have something to do with the demons getting a hold of some body parts.
Ah, okay.
In the dimly lit houses of antiquity, you
Mhm.
know, a demon might come skipping along and grab hair or nail.
Okay.
Well, that's my supposition about the nails, but it's a big deal with the older Turkish Jews. They well, not the other thing about the mirrors. May I say that in all of those countries, they have like Iran, Kurdistan, and so forth, both Jewish and Muslim. The mirrors have doors or panels that they keep closed at night.
Huh.
In the village, they don't look in the mirror at night. And if you go to the Iran or Kurdistan or so forth, the old mirrors have panels.
Oh. I didn't know. Thank you. Any others to share from your own experiences? Yeah, Barbara.
I know it's tradition, but I think it's actually based on superstition because my kids remember this. They were very young when my natural father died, but going around covering all the mirrors so the soul, it had something to do with the soul not leaving the body too soon, or the soul not getting caught up in the mirror after somebody passes away.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhat related is putting stones on the grave.
Ah,
So I guess I heard it speak so the spirit would not wander.
right, to weigh it down, right? Right, which is certainly a, very common practice. I'd say a religious practice, right? And maybe this layer of where it came from or how people interpret it, right? Does that push it into the realm of superstition, or is it just the reason behind this religious custom?
Is there a reason given for that somewhere?
Well, there are many reasons given, but yeah, one of them is to sort of weigh down the soul so it doesn't wander. Another, I guess, more practical reason given is that that it lets people know that somebody has visited, right, in a way that flowers or after a couple of days either get mowed by the groundskeepers or die or blow away, but the stone is there to show, at least for somewhat longer, that the grave had been visited. So yeah, a number of reasons, but those are a couple of them. Somebody had mentioned garlic. So one of the things that I found is that actually a Sephardic custom was to hang garlic on a bed over a new baby to protect against the evil eye. And also a similar, well, I don't know if similar, but a coral necklace was also placed on the new baby's neck to protect them against the evil eye. I think common thinking would be, if you don't want bad things to happen to babies, maybe don't put necklaces on their necks, when they're really young. But yeah, I think the pediatrician would say that's a no-no. But yeah, I mean, so interesting that, that of course the most well-known thing with garlic and protection is with vampires. I have no idea if that's at all related to this, but it's interesting that garlic sort of comes up, right, in various traditions as ways to ward off evil.
I remember too in our shul when I was little, after the services, and I never thought about this, someone would always go around and close all the books that were left open.
Yeah. So that's a big one too. That if there's a holy book, that you don't leave it open. So like a Siddur or a volume of Talmud or a Tanakh, that all of those are closed as a way to make sure that the demons don't steal holy knowledge and use it for their evil plans.
And to kiss it when you drop it on the ground.
Right. That's another thing to be sure to do. Right. So practices around Siddurim and Torah scrolls and Tanakhs, again, are these superstitious? Are these just the rituals around these things? To kiss something that falls on the ground, is that the same as closing it, right, if it's being left open? I don't know. Right. Again, where do we draw that line? And what might we call these different things? I'll go through another, a list of things that I thought of, some of which we've already covered, and also ones that I found as I was thinking about our time this evening. One of which is that when somebody's ill, there's a tradition of changing their name, sort of as a way of tricking the Malach HaMavet, right, the angel of death, or tricking any demons that might be affecting them and causing their symptoms. So you actually change their name to something else, so that when the demons come looking for Leah, right, and all they find is Sarah, right, that they'll go on their way and not bother this person anymore.
That's somewhat related to Ashkenazi Jews not naming a baby after a living person, so they not get confused.
Right. Yeah, these demons get confused pretty easily, it seems.
Well, that image of demons skipping was just, but it's also related to why for Mishpachah, traditionally one uses the mother's name rather than the father's name in identifying somebody, so that again they can't the angel of death cannot find them.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's cousin married a girl who had the same name as, I think it was his mother, I can't remember, and she was asked to change her name, which she did.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she legally changed it, but the name that she went by got changed.
Huh.
My brother had a tumor in his leg when he was 14. And I guess biopsies were much slower then, but in that period after it was discovered, and it was ultimately benign, thank God, but it was a very rough time. And I don't exactly remember how it happened, but my parents told me that grandma I went to shul or something. She changed my brother's name from Jack Yaakov to Chaim, life.
Right. Right.
And
So
to this day, we joke around. We say, "Oh yeah, Jack Chaim Deutsch." Is there a ritual to do that, or I mean, is there a procedure?
I've never been asked to help with that. But I mean, there are certainly naming rituals, right, that we do for babies.
Mhm.
And um, I imagine I don't know for sure, but if I were to invent one, I might invite somebody for an aliyah and invite them up by their new name to the Torah. Because of course, you know, if we're talking about Hebrew names or Jewish names, right? But most of the time that you use that is when you're called up for an aliyah.
And
Is
I
that
guess
what some? Oh,
go ahead.
Is that what someone would do if they're transitioning from a male to female or female to male?
Well, you know, there's I don't know that there's one settled thing yet, but I think that would certainly be part of it. You know, there's a blessing that you say when you give somebody a name. So I think altering that blessing to make it make sense, not for a baby, but for an adult.
Oh, like in conversion, when
Yeah.
somebody picks a new name for.
Right. So I would imagine, you know, putting the Torah scroll in their arms and offering them the priestly blessing and maybe reciting Shema, you know, something along those lines to give weight to the moment and maybe a kiddush, right, to mark it as a holy moment and a joyous moment.
When my son was converted, he was 4, and we went through bris and the mikvah and everything, but all I did was write his Hebrew name on the
Certificate.
certificate.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
You know, I find it interesting though, we were talking about naming a child after someone who's died, but then you look at, I find it interesting the different customs, because with Sephardim,
Right.
you would name the child after somebody living, especially a grandparent, to honor them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That is a big difference between Ashkenazi custom and Sephardic custom. And there are a lot of naming conventions when it comes to in Sephardic culture. So some of the ones I found that if a son was born after the death of his father, he would be called Chilibon, which is I think related to chole, like someone who's sick. If someone's born after a period of mourning, they're called Ben Zion, right, a child of Zion. If the mother had had a long period of not being able to have a child, the newborn received the name Rachamim, which is mercy. If someone was living in extreme poverty, they might change one of the names of the sons to Nisim, meaning miracles, hoping for prosperity and for a miracle to come to them. A baby boy who was born on Shabbat was named Shabbatai a lot of the time. And so there are all of these naming conventions, especially in the Sephardic world, and hoping that oh, my daughter's unhappy in the hoping that that these names have some power to affect the child or affect the family in positive ways. So another ritual that's unrelated to this that you may have seen is to wear a red string bracelet, right, on one's, actually usually on the left wrist. And if you're in Jerusalem, right, there are a lot of people on the street who are there offering red bracelets, of course, would love a donation. But this comes from it's known as a Kabbalistic ritual, right? Sort of as protection against the evil eye, popularized by people like Madonna, right? A devotee of Kabbalah or the Kabbalah Center. I was reading that, I guess, when Michael Cohen was testifying before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, he wore a red string on his wrist. So this is something that has been popularized just in our modern day culture, but goes back to a Kabbalistic ritual, and probably actually comes from originally from the book of Genesis. So when Jacob is born, right, Jacob and Esau actually, so in Genesis 38, Rebecca gives birth to twins, right? And the text says, when it came to pass, when she travailed, that one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this one came out first, right? So as an identifier of this is the firstborn child. And it came to pass that as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how have you broken forth? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was Peretz. So sorry, not Jacob and Esau. This is Peretz. This is later than Jacob and Esau. And afterward his brother came out, and he had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was Zerah. So this is actually with the story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38, and her firstborn was not actually the one to emerge first fully, but the way to signify who was that red string. And so that's probably where that comes from, that it was, at least according to the text, seems just like an identifier, but a lot more weight has been put upon that, and the wearing of the red string. Other ones that I found was, and I want to read a piece about this, tugging on your ears when you sneeze. Has anyone ever encountered that? I see a couple of head nods. One of the things my mom made me do, and you can explain yourself since you're here, is if we were leaving a cemetery, that we had to wash our hands, right, as we were leaving, or before going in the door of the house. So why?
So you don't take death with you, and so it was thought to be a protection from somebody more dying. And I think that's actually based in I don't know that it's based in science, but for lack of a better word, I'll say that. But I think it was somewhat based in the idea that you don't take disease with you as you go forth. But then I think it also got broadened to that you don't bring death out into the world with you.
Yeah, traditionally, when that, I mean, I know that in for one of my parents, and I don't remember which one, it could have been both, who knows, that there was a bowl of water and a pitcher put on the back porch so that anybody who came from the cemetery could wash before they came into the house.
Yeah, so you'll see that pretty regularly if you're going to a Shiva house, right? If you're going to a meal after a burial, to someone's home, that they'll put a pitcher of water in a bowl outside of the door.
So just I'm back to the red string, is that there's also a Chinese tradition of a red string, and I was looking up because I knew it existed, I just couldn't remember what it was about. And it says the red string of fate, and it's apparently a Chinese legend about true love and putting the string on that somebody's gonna match up. It's, who knows? But
Well, and red in Chinese culture, right, is certainly the lucky color.
Yeah.
Red on the Chinese New Year, people are given money in red envelopes as gifts. And I think, unless I'm confusing things, I think red is the traditional color for a wedding gown in China.
well, there's a lot of red stuff relative to marriage and all. So
Yeah.
that's what.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is one thing I found about the red string was that it's believed that once it falls off of a woman's wrist naturally, that she'll meet the person that she's going to marry. And so in that way, it's sort of associated with fertility and good luck and protection from bad things in that way. Salt appears in a number of superstitions. Whether it's putting salt in the corners of rooms or in one's pockets, or when somebody moves into a home, right, a housewarming gift, among some other things, is salt, thought to protect against evil spirits or demons. But again, this is one that probably we could trace back in some way to biblical text and ritual, in that salt certainly played a role in the sacrifices, as a valuable thing, and so the idea that salt has some ritual power was probably, that just the ways in which it has power and the settings in which it has power transformed over time, but the material itself and the power of that raw material definitely has its origins in textual tradition.
My dad would make knives and he would give them as a housewarming gift. And he always insisted that there be an exchange of money for the knife, even if it was as small as a dime or a nickel. And the reason he gave, which was based in, as far as I know, Jewish tradition, was that somehow gave the giver of the knife some protection, that the knife would be not used against them.
So I remember him making me pay him once when he gave me a knife, and so I looked into that as I was actually earlier today, because I was thinking about that, and I couldn't find anything that said it was a specifically Jewish ritual. I saw it listed on websites as a much more general understanding, not just in the Jewish space, and that it wasn't quite as specific as the knife might be used to cut the giver, right, if they were not given money in exchange for it, but it might cut the bonds between the two, right? It might somehow sever their relationship, whatever that relationship is. And so a lot of people, along with a gift of a knife, also give a coin as part of the gift, so that it can then be returned, that the coin can be returned to the giver. So that's what I found earlier today.
Well, either your grandfather expounded on that, or people in the shtetls did.
Yeah, well,
one or the other. Yeah.
He was known to
Embellish
a little bit. Which we love.
So back to the salt.
Yeah.
My grandfather, who didn't believe in superstition at all, which is why I don't know very many of these. The one thing that he did do is, after he salted his challah, he threw a pinch of it over his shoulder. Just, I believe, has to do with the line of, like, when you get a box of matzah and it says challah is taken, which is part of, sort of reflects on the sacrifice stuff of what was taken for the priests, the portion that was separated for the priests. And that was, so I think that it's the same stuff.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about a Pinyon Haben, where you buy back the child, and I know it's based on custom, but there's no superstition or anything involved with that? It's just the custom of buying them back so they don't have to do the service in the temple, or what?
Yeah, so that's actually related to the text. I think Exodus, I was just looking at it. I think Exodus 34 might be where it talks about that. I can find it in a moment, where and it relates to the Passover story, right? Where every firstborn in Egypt that was not protected, right, by the blood on the doorpost died, and that that as a way of sort of repaying God for that protection, that every firstborn really belonged to God. And then God says, yes, every firstborn really should belong to me, and therefore you have to redeem your firstborn from that, either temple service or something along those lines. So so where is that? In Exodus 34, there's it talks about the different holidays and how to celebrate them, at least in the ancient Israelite space. And then in Exodus 34:19, it says, every first issue of the womb is mine, from all your livestock that drop as male as firstling, whether cattle or sheep. And then in verse 20, but the firstling of a donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. And then more to our point, and you must redeem every male firstborn among your children. None shall appear before me empty-handed. So there is this ritual these days of pidyon haben, that for a firstborn son, you would find a kohen, right, somebody who is of the priestly lineage, and you actually give them a certain amount of money as a way of redeeming him from that responsibility and that service. I don't know about what we might call superstitions around that. And I guess what happens if you don't. There probably are some about why you need to, and what would happen if you didn't, that bad things might happen to him. I don't know specifically though.
One of my grandmothers wouldn't let you step over someone else. They said
Yeah.
it would stunt your growth. I don't know if that was a Jewish thing though.
Yeah, it is. It is. That's another one I found, that that you're not supposed to step over somebody, especially a child, if they're like lying down on the floor.
Right. If we were playing, we were not allowed to step over each other in her presence.
Right. And it says, yeah, if you do, you will cause them to stop growing. And to reverse the course, you just step back over them and ask that they put their feet down. So that's, at least for that one, there's a way to undo what has been done. As we think about the power of these things, right, and what it really means to do these things, I wanted to share this from Rabbi Emily Ilana Lozben Ostrov, who said, she's a Reform rabbi, used to be in Erie, Pennsylvania. I don't know if she's there anymore. I think she might be somewhere else now. But she said, to one person, it is a custom, an important tradition that ties them to their Judaism, and to another, it was simply ridiculous or antiquated act or belief. In many ways, some of what we do for certain holidays or dealing with death may now be considered custom, but could have at some time been considered mere superstition. And just as we liberal Jews decide which mitzvot have meaning, for many of us, we decide which superstitions or customs also have meaning. When I pull on my ears after sneezing, while speaking of someone who passed away, I do it because my grandmother used to tell me to do it. It connects me to my traditions and to my history. I don't know that I believe in any repercussions from not doing it, but I'm just compelled to do it, and it makes me smile and think of my beloved grandmother. So when we think about what some of these superstitions are, and if we really believe in, the evil eye or demons or the evil spirits that we're trying to protect ourselves against, that continuing these customs and knowing about them in the first place can connect us back to, my grandpa, can connect us to other family members. And even if we don't know people specifically who did these things, can point us back in the direction of our tradition and help us identify as part of this group, right? That in which these things came about. Not necessarily because we think if we don't, throw salt over our shoulder that the evil eye will have at us, but because it's something that we've seen somebody we care about do, and it helps us remember them and what was important to them, or at least what was a custom to them. Some of the ones that I was least familiar with, and that, so I struggle with, because it's not that they really make me think about somebody I know or knew or loved. And even, if I'm talking about a Sephardic custom, it's not even my close ancestors who were doing these things. And so, I'm wondering, what power these things can have. Are they just kind of nice to know, or are they more important than that? So some Sephardic customs I found was that if somebody is in labor and the delivery is difficult, that household members opened doors and windows, praying for the uterus to open easily. That if something is going wrong, there's something called a precante, I believe is how you pronounce it. And there's a whole ritual around the precante, which had to be said usually at Rosh Chodesh, at the beginning of the month, or could be in the middle of the week during a Torah reading day on Monday or Thursday. When somebody was stricken, the person who would do this precante ritual would go out to sea, and would do this, would read the following. I'm not going to try it in the Ladino, but I'll read the translation, which is, "I will cut your root, I will cut your body, I will wither the extremities of your body, I will scatter you throughout the mountains." And that was done while the person was passing their hand over the body of the stricken person, and this would dissolve water and salt in water, and wash the person's face and arms and legs. So kind of cutting off those body parts from the ailment. And if the person yawned while this ritual was going on, then it was said that it was the illness or the bad thing leaving the body during the recitation of the precante. It sometimes was accompanied with herbal cures, with minor prayers, with some kind of a performance against the evil eye. So, was this medicine? Was this religious ritual with prayers? Was this superstition? Right? What do we call this thing? Another Sephardic ritual was had to do with when there was a disloyal husband. So I found this one to be quite interesting, which was there are a couple of rituals around this, but it said that when a husband was found to be unfaithful, the wife or the fortune teller perhaps would take a little water and wash the face of a cat and the rump of a dog whose hatred for each other is known. This water would then be poured over the doorway of the woman, the subject of the husband's infidelity. And another practice would be to give the unfaithful husband the tongue of a jackass to eat so that he would return to his wife. And then it listed that there are practices in Mea Sharim in Jerusalem, in the ultra Orthodox neighborhood, to put dirty water in a bucket and put that outside the door of the participants of the infidelity. And it just went on to say that there are other sort of superstitious and highly crass or creative rituals to deal with infidelity in the community. So that's sort of an interesting, like, after the fact, like maybe the evil eye or the demon has already visited you in its own way, and how to sort of try and make things right, or at least help people realize what they've done. So just another interesting one to share for you all. You know, the other one that I came up with that is sort of second nature to us, and we might not even think about, is giving monetary gifts in multiples of 18, right? Which is the value of chai, of chet yud, right? The gematria of that each Hebrew letter has a numerical value. Chet is 8 and yud is 10, and together chai, meaning life, is 18. And so you wish somebody a long life or a good life by giving them a gift in multiples of 18, by wishing them chai in that way. So, you know, that is ingrained in many of our practices. You know, for my bar mitzvah, I got lots of checks and denominations of $18. And I don't think I thought about it as superstition then, but you know, maybe it's in that realm as well.
What about a person sneezing and saying, God bless you?
Yeah, which is certainly not just in the Jewish tradition, right? Of you know, God bless you, or Gesundheit, right, which is about health, which also in Hebrew, right? The Hebrew is livriut, right, to health. Right, is that the there might have been an understanding that when somebody sneezes that their heart skips a beat, right? And so wishing them health and blessing. Right, is that just a nice thing to say to somebody? Is that superstition? Is that something different? I don't know how I would categorize that. How about you?
I always thought of it as like something, I've just thought of it this way. I have no basis for it. There's something bad leaving the body.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. It's getting the bad stuff out.
Right. But I have no idea whether there's any basis for that whatsoever.
Yeah. Lewis, I think I saw a hand.
Well,
Explain.
I always heard that bless you was because when people sneezed, it was the beginning of a cold, and people die pretty regularly
Exactly.
of colds. Yeah,
Or it might have been the beginning of a plague.
Ah,
right.
so Lewis blank, because you made yourself appear, made me think about traveling. So there is one ritual to wear a metal pin on clothing when embarking on a trip. So it might be like a safety pin or something before taking a journey. That metal was thought to be a powerful protective substance. So as we look to traveling, maybe in the next week or so.
And
That
that
was
goes along with when who was it? The metal staff made out of copper. Maybe I can't remember who it was. It might have been Moses, but there are healing powers in copper.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you would touch people with the staff, the thought was that you would help heal them because of the microbial. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. The textual basis I found for the metal was that in the Passover story with the plague of blood, right? The Torah states that water that's stored in vessels of wood or stone will turn to blood, but metal isn't mentioned. And so, by omission, they think that the metal was protective in that way against that plague.
And that was obviously well before passing through metal detectors to get on a plane.
Well, in that story, metal is the only thing that's not porous.
Right.
So, and it's like kashrut, you can't use all those same things for milk and meat because they're porous.
Yeah. I mean, metal, you also can't really go back and forth. Glass, you can.
Glass, yeah.
But right, it's definitely has a different quality to it. One that I don't know is specifically Jewish, but I saw on a number of lists was knocking on wood, which I always was told that it had to do with the wood of the cross, right, and Jesus. But I did actually find it in a lot of lists as something that maybe, even though it has its origins in not in Jewish practice, that it's something that a lot of Jews do. So that's one thing of, when does it become a Jewish practice, a Jewish superstition, right? Is it that its origin has to be within the textual tradition, or is it just that a good number of Jews need to do it, which they certainly do? Barbara.
Following up on that, I wonder about Catholics eating fish on Friday because of the thing that the fish, did it start out maybe with Jews because of fish being what survived the flood?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know, at least, I don't know where that came from. Louis, were you trying to say something?
Yes, this fish is neutral. It's paref.
Fish is par. Is that what you're asking?
Paref, yes.
Yeah. Right. So it's not considered meat. So maybe that's the origin. I'm not sure. So there are obviously more things that are out there that we could keep going and going, but though I am not prone to magical thinking, I think that there can be power in some of these rituals, and in the power of these to connect us across the Jewish community and also across time and space, and to think about the people for whom these were very important and protective, and that maybe at least this is maybe a message for myself to take a second look at these and try to find the power in them that I might have looked down my nose at previously. So I hope in the next week maybe we'll each find an opportunity to engage in one or two of these practices. Hopefully none surrounding death, but to try it on, right, and to see if it's not something that's your regular custom, to see how it feels, right, and if it has any power, whether that's supernatural or not for you. That there's some depth to a lot of these practices. So
I saw that there was not going to be in-person services on the weekend. I am coming to Washington, but it says you're not going to have services on the 24th or 25th.
right, they'll be Zoom only.
Okay.
And I'll be be leading on the 24th, Lewis, so I'll look forward to seeing you online.
Well, I'm going to be in that's the only time I'm coming to Washington, but so be it.
Well, Ruth and Alex will be leading this Friday and be observing Trans Day of Remembrance as well. So our member Charlotte will be speaking for that, and so I hope that that you attend and that's meaningful, and that you have a lovely Thanksgiving if I don't see you.
Thank
Night.
you.
Good night, Leto.
Thank you, Rabbi Jake, for an
Very interesting.
entertaining and enlightening class.
Yes.
Enjoy their superstitions or rituals, whatever else they like to do.
Yes.
Yeah,
We're
thank
going to
you.
have to invent some Zoom superstitions and rituals to go along with these classes. So,
Like
thank
if
you,
you're in
Rabbi.
the middle square.
You can work on that. Matt, you can work on that and get
I'll
back to
get
us.
back to you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Night.
Thank you, Jake,
Thank
and
you for
thank you for the
letting me
commercial.
join.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
Stop